this according to thehill.com. The White House announced earlier today that President Trump has agreed to waive the Jones Act, which will temporarily lift shipping restrictions on Puerto Rico and enable the hurricane-ravaged island to receive necessary aid. The waiver from the shipping law, which requires American-made and operated vessels to transport cargo between U.S. ports, will only last for 10 days and goes into effect immediately. The president says at Ricardo Rossello's request, the president has authorized the Jones Act to be waived for Puerto Rico. It will go into effect immediately. That was tweeted out by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Lawmakers in Congress since Monday have been pushing for a one-year waiver from the rules in order to help speed up deliveries of food, fuel, and other critical supplies to Puerto Rico, which has been battered by 2 hurricanes in the last month. Officials estimate that the island could be without power for 6 months. The administration faced fierce backlash for not immediately lifting the law for Puerto Rico after it issued a 2-week waiver for Texas and Florida in response to Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert said on Twitter early Thursday that Puerto Rico waiver was granted immediately after Rossello had petitioned Trump for the exemption Wednesday night. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 10 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. If you miss any of the show, catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. We are on Facebook Live as well, just like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. And we have a lot to get into in the show tonight. I have a lot of interesting stuff, actually, on Puerto Rico that I'm going to get into later in the show, talking about the Jones Act and talking about some other things that I did not know about Puerto Rico that has really negatively affected their economy, and it's really enlightening. And then, of course, there's the politicization of all of this, the politicization of natural disasters, which is getting really annoying. The left is trying to make this into Trump's Katrina, I guess, saying he should have done more quickly. It's a tough situation. What I've noticed with a lot of these kinds of situations with disasters or other stuff, it's easy for us here to say, you should have done this, you should have done that. But then when you actually look at the logistics on the ground and you actually look at the situation, the real situation, and you actually look at it on the local level, you realize, okay, it's really not that easy. Especially since the whole island is without power, whole island is without cell phone communication, and it's an island.
And low fuel.
And yes, low fuel. So you have all of these problems that make logistics incredibly difficult. And everyone wants to push a magic button and just send everything there and everything's better. It doesn't work that way. We know the military's there now. We know FEMA's there now, and we know Trump has waived the Jones Act temporarily. So it's a tough situation. It's a disaster. That's why it's called a disaster. And this whole idea of it's hard because they're an island. In Texas and in Florida, you could have ordinary American citizens get in their cars, drive there, and help them out immediately. You can't do that with Puerto Rico. The airport there is totally ruined. So you can't even fly. It's very difficult to fly there. So I don't like this blaming of our leaders for natural disasters. So we'll get into that a little bit more into the show. I do want to get into Trump's tax plan because there is some good to it, a lot of good to it, but there are some things I don't like as well. And I want to get your take as well. 407-916-5400, and you can text to 23680. And then, of course, we have Mr. Tom Benson.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Pretty good. You seem like in a good mood today. That's good.
Well, of course. Why not? You know?
It's Friday Eve. That's
right. One day closer to the weekend.
Yeah, exactly right. So we have Tom Benson here as well, who will be throwing in his brilliant commentary from time to time.
Plus, we have another NFL game tonight. Green Bay plays. I'm not even sure who they play, to tell you the truth. But they're asking the home team to lock arms during the national anthem tonight
for a show of unity.
Yeah,
oh, that's so nice.
That's I guess that's their way of saying we want you on our side.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get into that later in the show as well, and I'll do the voice of reason of the day, and we have things that made Yaffee laughy. I will end the show with that today. So I want to get into Trump's tax plan And it's really the GOP tax plan that Trump is pushing. There are still some things we don't know about it, some things that have to be worked out. But also all we can do is look at what they've done so far. Is it a good plan? In my opinion, it depends on the goal. What is the goal of this plan? Is the goal to cut taxes for everyone? If that's the goal, then no, it's not a good plan. Not everyone will receive a big tax cut. A lot of people will. A lot of people will. But there will be some, because they're getting rid of the deductions in a lot of cases, that's going to affect some people. Is the goal of the plan to stimulate the economy and create jobs? If that's the goal, then it is a really good plan. The best parts of this plan that I've seen, and that's an agreement from conservatives to moderates. The left hates it no matter what, and we're going to get into that in the next segment. They like the business side of it. So it lowers the corporate tax rate to 20%. It also allows people with small businesses who file as individuals or as corporations or LLCs, it would lower their rate to 25%. It also lets them deduct investments into the business. So when they invest in future offices and all that, it allows deductions for that as well. All of those things will spur economic growth. Cutting taxes can spur economic growth, unless you're Bernie Sanders and you believe that only the government can do that. So, and we're going to get into that because I'm going to play Bernie Sanders. He reacted to this, posted a video on Twitter about this, talked about why it's bad. So we're going to play the whole thing, and we're going to go to a bit by bit and talk about why he's wrong, of course. But so if the goal is to spur the economy, then it's a pretty good plan for the most part. If the goal is to get rid of the debt and cut the deficits, it's a terrible plan. It's a terrible plan. Now, when you talk to Trump or you talk to the Republicans in Congress, they will say, well, what this will do is it will spur the economy so much that we will grow our way out of the debt and the deficits. I don't buy that. I think in the long term, yes, it will spur economic growth. You will have revenue increases, and that will help in the long run. So some say, that's great. In the short run, we're going to see some massive deficits, I think. And I don't know. The problem is they're still increasing spending so much. I'm seeing no evidence that any of them are really serious about cutting spending. And that really should be one of the biggest priorities right now. Maybe the number one priority of our government right now is to cut spending. But politically, you can't do that, obviously. So then the Democrats say, well, we have to raise taxes to get rid of the deficit. Well, then you hurt the economy, which can hurt the deficit, if the economy crashes again, then it hurts the deficit even more. So it's a big problem. It's called the Laffer curve. We could go over that in another time. But so if the goal is to get rid of the deficit and the debt, I don't think so. They need to add spending cuts to this. We need entitlement reform, but nobody has the guts to do that. That's really what we need, is entitlement reform. That would be one of the biggest things to help this government and to help this country for the future and to get rid of the deficits and the debt. That's really what this country needs, and nobody wants to touch it.
Does it cut taxes for the so-called middle class?
It depends. Mm-hmm. For a lot of the middle class, it does. So what it does is it gets rid of a lot of the itemized deductions. Uh-huh. It raises the rate for the lowest income earners from 10 to 12%. So you would think, no, it doesn't. But it increases the standard deduction. It doubles it, actually. So for married couples, the standard deduction would go up to $24,000. For a lot of married couples, that would be a pretty good tax break. It would actually increase the amount of people in the country, they say, that would not be paying any federal income taxes at all. And that's another problem with this. Bud talked about it this morning. I agree. We keep increasing the amount of people that aren't paying anything into the system but getting benefits back. And that's a problem because it makes people misunderstand what the purpose of government is. And everyone needs skin in the game. The government's not just supposed to hand out free stuff. So the problem with the standard deduction thing. So for single people like me, I'd get a higher standard deduction. I would probably benefit. For married couples with maybe one kid or no kids, they get more back. For married couples with a bunch of kids, they don't. because they would not be able to claim these kids as dependents, or they would not get the deductions for the amount of kids they have. So they would actually not get as big of a tax break.
Have they unveiled anything about deducting your interest on your home, on your mortgage?
Apparently, it would keep the mortgage deduction, but it would not. There's a bunch of other deductions it would get rid of, and that was one of the selling points, because it does lower the rate for the richest Americans, but it also gets rid of the alternative minimum tax for them, and it also gets rid of some of their deductions as well, and that's kind of their big selling point. So that's why I mean, if the goal of this was to cut taxes for everyone, it's not going to do that. For most people, yes. For everyone, no. And that's almost impossible, actually. And it's hard to make an argument to cut taxes for everyone when you have almost 40% of the country that doesn't pay taxes anyway. So it's hard to push a tax cut for them when they're not paying federal income taxes anyway. So now, if the goal of this, the last thing, and this is another big selling point that they're using, if the goal of this is to simplify the tax code, then it does a very good job of that, because it gets rid of it. It puts it down to 3 brackets. It gets rid of a lot of the deductions, and it gets rid of a lot of the tax code. So if the goal is to simplify the tax code, which they believe will spur the economy, because the complications of the tax code make things even worse and waste a lot of money in that, then this is good. So there is a lot of good in this. It will spur the economy because it will cut business taxes. And they say, oh, well, it would only be for the richest companies or whatever. Well, it will benefit the rich companies, but it will benefit all companies, because they will be paying less taxes. They will encourage them to bring the money back here. And I agree with all that. You have to be competitive in the world market. You have to be competitive, and it's hard for us to be competitive when we have one of the highest corporate tax rates out there. All it does is encourage people to try to find loopholes and go around the tax system by putting money overseas or whatever. So most of it's good. The biggest problem I have, and this was what Bud said this morning, and I agree with them, is that this country has to get serious about the debt and the deficits. Because one, it has to be paid back, and once entitlement spending is going to balloon in the next few years, and that's going to increase the debt even more. And the bigger the government is, and the bigger the debt is compared to the GDP, it ends up pulling down the economy. It's harder for the economy to grow in the future if the debt keeps going up and up and up. There are some big-time economists who have pointed that out, and it's true. The bigger the government is and the bigger the share of the debt is to the economy, it brings down the ability for economic growth. So there's my take on it. I'm laying it out there, the good and the bad of it. There's still some of it we don't know as well. We don't know where the brackets are going to line up. That will also depend who gets a break and who doesn't. But in the next segment, what I want to do is go to what the left is saying about it. And, the biggest leftist out there is obviously Bernie Sanders, no doubt. But he's popular. A lot of people go to him for this kind of stuff. They love him. So he ended up putting out a video on his Twitter page and his social media about why he didn't like these tax cuts. And I have to go through, we're going to go through it all, and I have to disagree with them on a lot of it. I want your take as well. Tell me what you think of the tax cuts. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. We have so much to get to on the show, and we will. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your voice of reason here, Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. You can call and with your comments and your take at 407-916-5400, or you can text to 23680, or you can comment on the Facebook Live video as well. Just like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page, or send me a friend request, and it is up there. So we've been talking about the big story of the day, which is the GOP and Trump's tax plan. It's getting a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism, a lot of support, and we're looking at the details. In the first segment, I went over the good and the bad of it. The good, it will help the economy. The bad, it will increase the deficit. But of course, the Democrats, and especially the radical leftist Democrats, They don't like it. I mean, all the Democrats say they don't like it, and it's the usual same argument you hear over and over again. It benefits the rich, and it hurts everyone else. Well, I thought then we would go through one of the biggest criticisms, and what better way to do that than to find out what Bernie Sanders had to say. Yeah, I know, he's a Democratic socialist. He's really not even a true Democrat, but the Democrats love him now. They love this new socialist guy now. They love more and more. They seem to be going towards that direction of socialism. So Bernie Sanders put out a video on his Twitter page why he doesn't like this tax plan. So let's go through it, and then I will give my voice of reason to it and comment on it as well. And you can comment as well. All right, let's see what Bernie Sanders had to say about it. Go ahead and play it, Tom Menson.
President Trump today announced his tax proposals. They are a disaster.
Thank you very much.
I thought maybe you'd want to comment right there. They're a disaster.
Oh.
Gee whiz.
Yeah, I mean.
Pulling no punches here, huh?
You were expecting me to be surprised that he said that. I'm just like, yeah, well, of course he thinks they're a disaster. Because his tax plan would just be so great.
Oh, of course.
For the businesses would love that. I mean, the stock market growth we'd have, it would be even 10 times more if Bernie Sanders' tax plan was in place, Okay, let's continue on, Tom Menson.
Much. You just want massive tax cuts. That's what you want.
They're designed to benefit the very wealthiest people in this country at the expense of virtually everybody else.
The largest tax cut in our country's history.
And here is the context of Trump's tax proposals. Remember, just the other day, the Republicans were pushing a health care proposal that would have thrown 30 million people off of the health insurance they have and cut Medicaid over a 10-year period.
Stop right there. I actually meant to stop it earlier, but there's two things I want to go for. For one, he says this will benefit the wealthy while making it worse for everyone else. At the expense of everyone else, he says. Why, and this is the Democrats, this is always their argument. Why does cutting their rate hurt me? What do I care if they pay less taxes? Why does that affect me? As long as I'm paying less taxes too, and I would be under this plan. So, and they are still paying more. So they're still paying 35%. That's a bigger rate than everyone else. So why is it that lowering it from 39 to 35%, it helps them? Why does helping them automatically hurt me? Well, in Bernie Sanders' world, it's because, well, people, lower income, middle income people are helped by the government. So when you believe that it's the government that helps the middle class and lower class, then you believe the government needs more money to help the middle class and lower class. So anytime you get rid of the ability for the government to take more money and redistribute wealth, that hurts the lower class and middle class. Now, this isn't true. Obviously, if we lower taxes for the rich or anyone else and it stimulates the economy and creates more jobs, that would help me. But to him, that doesn't work. The only thing that helps the middle class and lower class is more government, redistribution of wealth through government programs. It's the same argument all over again. It's a different philosophy. It's not that cutting their taxes would really affect me. It doesn't. It's that the government, he believes, is what helps me, when I don't believe that. Okay, and before you do that, he talked about that usual lie that their healthcare plan would throw millions of people off health insurance. That's not true. We've gone over that over and over again. Many would choose to stop paying for health insurance that don't want to now, but they just don't want to pay the penalty.
Well, the other thing I recall is the figure was 22 million. Now all of a sudden it's 30 million. How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? That's how he always is. All right, go ahead and continue.
By $8 trillion. And the reason they did that ostensibly was because they're very worried about the national debt and the deficit. Well, what about this tax proposal? What does this do? Well, what this does is give massive tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations, and significantly increase the national debt by trillions of dollars.
Okay, stop right there. This is actually one point that Bernie Sanders makes that I actually kind of agree with. He talked about how the Republicans in their health care proposals were constantly trying to cut Medicaid and reform Medicaid so it wouldn't increase the deficit as much. So they were saying, well, we have to control deficits. But then they put forward this tax plan that would also increase the deficit. And this is actually a decent point. Not necessarily for the same reasons he's making, but I always asked myself, and I kept wondering, each healthcare proposal that was being thrown out there by the Republicans focused more on reforming Medicaid than actually getting rid of the regulations and the parts of of Obamacare that were really bad. They were focused more on reforming Medicaid. Why is that? Well, that's because they wanted to have that money that they were saving from reforming Medicaid so they could pass this tax reform. So everything they were doing was so they could eventually pass tax reform. And they think that's a good thing, but it prevented them from really focusing on what was most important, which was getting rid of the Obamacare regulations and all that stuff. They were too busy focused on reforming Medicaid, and that's why. A little deceptive. I understand what Bernie Sanders is saying, but I agree with the Republicans in this, that we do need to reform these entitlements. We do need to cut government spending, and Bernie Sanders will never, ever agree with that. He wants to increase government spending by something like $12 trillion, actually, with socialized medicine. So there's no way he's ever going to be for cutting spending. So the idea that Bernie Sanders cares about the deficit, he doesn't care about the deficit. It's just not true. He continues on here.
So you cut Medicaid by $1 trillion, throw people off health insurance in order to have the money available to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. We are living now at a moment of obscene and grotesque income and wealth inequality. Top 0.1% now owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%. 52% of all new income goes to the top 1%. And what Trump...
Stop right there. Okay. This is the other thing that socialists always do. They always play this game, and it's that, well, we have income inequality, the rich are making too much, and because they're making too much, they act like the rich are making too much at the expense of everyone else. That's what they always act like. So because the rich are getting richer, that means they're taking more of the wealth from us, is what he's arguing. But that's not true. Let's look at the richest people in America right now. Richest people in America. Number one, Bill Gates. He is worth $81 billion. Okay. Why does that affect me? Why do I care that he's worth $81 billion? Because his company is worth $570 billion. Microsoft's worth $507 billion. So if his company is worth $507 billion, doesn't he deserve some of that wealth for a company he created? But here's the other point I want to make. Microsoft, that's how much they're worth. But how much has that company helped our economy as a whole for the past couple decades? How much wealth has Microsoft created for everyone? Just think about it. Think about how every business now almost uses Windows. We use it here. How much that has helped our economy as a whole and created jobs for millions of Americans and created wealth for millions of Americans. So yes, Bill Gates is very wealthy, but he didn't get wealthy by taking wealth from the lower and middle classes. He got wealthy by creating more wealth for everyone. So just because he's wealthy doesn't mean that hurt us. In fact, his wealth is a reflection of how much wealth he created for all of us. It's the opposite. So Bernie Sanders is always making this argument that, well, the rich are getting richer and they're doing it at the expense of everyone else. But that's not true. Bill Gates is a great example. He didn't do it at the expense of everyone else. He did it by helping everyone else, creating economic wealth in this country. Okay, who's number two? Number two is Jeff Bezos. He's worth $67 billion, obviously, one of the founders of Amazon, CEO of Amazon. Amazon is worth $427 billion. So Bezos, yes, he's worth $67 billion. That's a lot of money. But his company that he helped create is worth $427 billion. That's $427 billion for shareholders, for workers, for everyone else in Amazon. Not only that, but think about how much Amazon has helped our economy. Think about how much wealth that Amazon has created in this country for everyone. Think about most of you people listening to me right now, I'm sure, use Amazon and has bettered your life in some way or another. So Jeff Bezos, yes, he is very wealthy, but how did he get wealthy? He helped create a company that helps the middle and lower classes, probably better than most any other company, because now middle and lower classes are able to afford products at a cheaper price because of Amazon. So this idea that the wealthiest Americans somehow got wealthy at the backs, at the expense of the middle and lower classes is not true. They got wealthy by creating goods and services that helped us. That's how capitalism works. That's why socialism doesn't work. So this whole lie that because they're rich, that means I should be upset. No, because they got rich by making us all richer and better off. All right. Little economics lessons for you there. He continues on here.
And his Republican friends want to do is make the very, very rich even richer, run up the deficit, and then announce that they got to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and everything else. Let me give you one example in this tax proposal, just one example of how absurd it is. Trump wants to repeal the estate tax. The estate tax applies only to the top 0.2%. The very, very, very richest families in this country, 99.8% of the American people do not pay a nickel in estate taxes. If that estate tax were repealed, we would lose something like $269 billion in revenue over a 10-year period. Families like the Walton family and the Koch brothers and the Adelson family, Sheldon Adelson, and families like the Trump family, multi-billionaire families would receive huge tax breaks while the middle class continues to shrink.
Okay, stop right there. So many issues I have with this. For one, he's right on some of the statistics on the estate tax. It really does only affect the richest people in this country. But what's the purpose of it? Why? Why are we taxing them for this? So when they die, the estate tax is when they die, there's a tax on their estate. Why is it there? The only reason I can think of is to take some of their wealth because they're rich. So because they're rich, the government should take their wealth just because they're rich. Why? Why do we buy into that premise? Because he believes, once again, that it's the government that's the best way to help the middle and lower classes. So when he says, well, it hurts the middle and lower classes and they continue to shrink, his plan to fix that is to take money from those rich people just because they're rich. It's the only reason to have that tax. There's no other reason. That's not that much revenue getting from it. So to take money from those rich people and redistribute it through government programs because he believes that government is the solution to all of this, which, of course, it's not. But it's another thing where it's like I'm supposed to be upset that they're getting a tax break. That doesn't affect me unless I want more government programs, which I don't. I don't think that's what solves the problem. Okay, he continues on.
Now, by standing together as a nation, we were able to defeat these disastrous health care proposals that the Republicans proposed. Our job now is again to stand together, to say to Trump, to say to the Republicans in Congress, yeah, we want tax reform. You're right. Tax system really is broken. But the way we're going to reform our tax system is not to give tax breaks to billionaires and to very large profitable corporations who are making record-breaking profits. What we are going to do is finally demand that the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. That is tax reform.
Okay, so his tax reform, once again, is that the wealthy are not paying their fair share. Well, let's look at the statistics here. This is according to the IRS, 2013. The top 1% of income earners in this country, okay, their share of all income earned is 19%. Their share of all income taxes paid is 38%. That's not fair? It's actually not fair for them, really, when you think about it. So they're paying much more than their fair share, if you look at that. The top 2% to 5% of income earners in this country pay 15% they earn 15% of the income in the country. They pay 21% of the taxes in this country. Sounds more than their fair share. Top 5% to 10%. They earn 11%, pay 11%. So that one is fair. Then as the lower you get, it starts to turn the other way. So the top 10% to 25%, they earn 22% of the income, pay 16%. And then you go to the bottom 50%. So the bottom 50% earn 11% of the income and pay only 3% of the income. Who's not paying their fair share? So this idea that the rich are not paying their fair share and that we are paying more than our fair share, the stats don't back that up. It's another lie by, of course, the socialists. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. I want to get into some facts on Puerto Rico, and we have much more to get to on the show. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Headline from CNN Money, of all places. The Jones Act has been hurting Puerto Rico for decades. I began the show with the headline about how President Trump has waived the Jones Act to help Puerto Rico for disaster relief efforts. Now, I want to talk about why that's important. Puerto Rico's going through a really tough time. They're going to need a lot of help for a long time. They really need to just get rid of the Jones Act. I guess that has to be done legislatively. I don't think Trump can just do that, but they need to get rid of it. There's really no reason to have it. It's been around for 100 years, but it was a protectionist measure that was meant to help shipping companies here. It hasn't really done that, and it hasn't helped Puerto Rico at all. It's just hurt them in the long run.
So under normal conditions, if you wanted to send a boatload of aid to Puerto Rico, you'd have to go to a U.S. land port, transfer it to another ship, and then ship it to Puerto Rico. Is that the deal?
Pretty much. So the law dates back, this is according to CNN Money, to 1920 and requires all goods ferried between U.S. ports to be carried on ships built, owned, and operated by Americans. Uh-huh. And those ships are far more expensive to buy and operate than ships flying foreign flags. As a result, it makes just about everything in Puerto Rico more expensive. It's a protectionist measure. This is why people like me are against protectionist measures, because it just makes things more expensive. This is a perfect result of that. A 2012 study from the New York Federal Reserve found that shipping a container from the U.S. East Coast to Puerto Rico costs $3,063. But shipping the same container on a foreign ship to the Dominican Republic nearby costs only $1,504. More broadly, the island loses $537 million per year as a result of the Jones Act, according to a different study conducted in 2010 at the University of Puerto Rico. So that's like double. That's double the amount of cost that they're having to pay because of the Jones Act. It was done in the 1920s, and there's no reason for it. There's no reason to have this anymore. So they're waiving it now to help them, but they need to get rid of it. It would help Puerto Rico a lot, especially with the economic problems. So we keep hearing about all Puerto Rico's economic problems. It seems like there's some easy solutions here to help them in this situation, to help get rid of some of these economic problems. Puerto Rican businesses and consumers feel the effects of the Jones Act every day. And the same goes for Hawaii and to some extent in Alaska. But it gets little attention on the U.S. mainland since it's often faster and cheaper to move goods in the continental U.S. by rail, truck, or pipeline. That's why it's also a lot harder to get them help in this time of needs. But I thought it was interesting that CNN Money here has a whole piece on why this is a problem. This needs to be gotten rid of. And it seems to me that this needs to be gotten rid of forever, not just waived temporarily. Many critics of the Jones Act, including Republican Senator John McCain, this is actually something I agree with him on, wow, have argued for years that it should be permanently repealed since the higher shipping costs are a drag on Puerto Rico's already struggling economy. I couldn't agree more. The rate difference between Jones Act carriers and foreign carriers had led farmers and ranchers on the island to more often source animal feed and crop fertilizers from foreign sources than from U.S. domestic sources, even though commodity prices were stated to be similar. Most fuel on the island is also brought from foreign countries for the same reason. So it's a big problem. It seems like they need to get rid of it. Now, there's actually another thing that's been hurting Puerto Rico's economy that I did not realize. But I got this from CNBC. It says, here's how an obscure tax change sank Puerto Rico's economy. And they were looking into this because of what's going on in Puerto Rico right now. More than half a century ago, U.S. lawmakers sought to help Puerto Rico emerge from a colonial past, transforming its largely agrarian economy into a manufacturing powerhouse. The effort, known as Operation Bootstrap, began with a series of tax breaks designed to attract manufacturers who would provide steady factory jobs. What do you know? Tax cuts. Tax cuts help stimulate the economy. What do you know?
Son of a gun.
For a time, the plan seemed to work. As standards of living in Puerto Rico rose, between 1950 and 1980, per capita gross national product grew nearly tenfold in Puerto Rico. And disposable income and educational attainment rose sharply. That was according to the Center for a New Economy, a think tank based in San Juan. One of those tax breaks, enacted in 1976, allowed U.S. manufacturing companies to avoid corporate income taxes on profits made in U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico. Manufacturers led by the pharmaceutical industry flocked to the island. But by the early 1990s, the provision faced growing opposition from critics who attacked the tax break as a form of corporate welfare. So what did they do? They got rid of the tax break. So what happened? People started losing. Plant closures and job losses followed. So instead of lowering the tax companies, so another thing that people were upset is they thought it was an unfair tax burden that fell to domestic Puerto Rican companies because the non-domestic ones didn't have to pay it. So instead of lowering the taxes for the domestic Puerto Rican companies, which would have helped everyone, they just raised the taxes on all the other companies. So what happened? They raised the taxes, and all those companies left. And now Puerto Rico has been struggling for years. The loss of factory jobs has been pretty substantial since that happened. The out-migration began before the recession. They said it really cranked up at the recession of 2008. From a peak of 3.8 million in 2004, Puerto Rican's population fell to about 3.4 million last year. According to estimates, a decline of nearly 11%. So I thought that was very interesting. You have a tax break that was proven to work. It created jobs there. They get rid of the tax break instead of just lowering it for everyone. And what happens? All those jobs leave. This is another argument why we need to lower the corporate tax rate here. You lower the corporate tax rate here, jobs are created, economic growth happens, and it's good for everyone. Great example right there. But Puerto Rico has had a bunch of problems. They've also spent way too much money on welfare programs and other things. They have a huge debt now. They have a lot more problems than that. But I thought that was an interesting example from CNBC that I did not realize. So you had the Jones Act, which is government regulation, and then you had increase of taxes, both which hurt their economy and help create the mess they're in now. Very interesting. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Yes, this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. You have to make sure to stay with me for the next hour. I'm going to get into something that a lot of people, I don't think I hear anyone talking about. Russia. I mean, people are talking about what Russia's doing, trying to meddle in our affairs and everything. Mm-hmm. There's a new story out that this whole thing with the NFL, Russia put out a bunch of Twitter stuff and tweets on both sides of the issue to once again encourage division in this country. Okay? This reminded me of an article that actually came out years ago in 2009 from a Russian economist or a Russian professor. And I'm going to pull it up in the next hour, and I want to get into it. He predicted, this Russian professor, he predicted that the United States would break up into parts and be balkanized.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah, it was a big thing.
Uh-huh.
And I remember at the time I criticized it. I say, this can never happen. This is all, America is great and united and strong. And I was like, yes, can never happen. United we stand, I remember saying. I wrote a blog about it at the time. The more I think about it, and when I actually look into what some of the things he says, the more possible I think it is, unfortunately. Now, his timing was off. He thought it would have been done by 2010. And some of the reasons are off. But when you actually look at the map, that he has like a map that he put out there.
Mm-hmm. Of all the countries that these states would organize.
Yeah, how the United States would break up, basically.
Right.
There was a time where I thought this was impossible. But then I look at the way the country is going today. For instance, the difference in thinking between the state of Texas and like the state of New York,
mm-hmm.
or the state of Alabama versus the state of California. Now, there's always been these differences, but it just seems like it's grown so much lately with the way our culture wars have gotten and the way how different we think in this country. It's kind of scary that could be a possibility if we don't change and turn things around. So I'm going to go into that a little bit and see what you think. A little controversial. I'm not saying it's going to happen or anything, but I think that's what Russia is trying to do. And nobody's talking about it. So we'll get to that and much more. I still haven't played the voice of reason of the day, so we'll get to that in the next hour as well. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We have one more hour to go, and I'll be right back.
So well that nothing comes from indifference.
This according to Reuters. A U.S. senator on Wednesday said Russian internet trolls seeking to polarize Americans helped fuel a debate ignited by President Donald Trump over whether NFL players should have the right to kneel during the national anthem. The assertion, made by Republican James Lankford, comes as congressional investigators probing Moscow's alleged meddling in the 2016 presidential election are focusing on how Russian agents used social media to spread divisive political content. This is what he said. He says, "We watched, even this weekend, the Russians and their troll farms, their internet folks, start hashtagging out hashtag take a knee and are also hashtagging out hashtag boycott NFL." Lankford, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, said during a hearing on threats faced by the United States. He says they were taking both sides of the argument this weekend. Let me repeat that for you. They were taking both sides of the argument this weekend to try to raise the noise level of America and make a big issue seem like an even bigger issue as they were trying to push divisiveness in this country, Lankford said. Now, I just have to say that we don't really need their help to push that. We're doing that just fine on our own. But he continues on. He said Lankford did not provide evidence to corroborate his statement. A Lankford aide said U.S. intelligence shared with senators showed that Russian troll operations relied on social media to meddle in U.S. issues going back to last year's presidential election in an effort to divide Americans. Very interesting, because this is something Glenn Beck was saying last year, and this is something I repeated last year.
And you wonder how Twitter could even begin to control something like that.
They can't.
Yeah.
You can't. You can't control stuff like that. It's practically impossible. I mean, Facebook's trying now, but what's really interesting about this is we're finding out. Oh, by the way, I haven't introduced the show.
Yeah, what show is this, by the way?
I don't know. I mean, everyone knows. You know what show this is. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 10 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. We're on Facebook Live as well. You can call 407-916-5400 or text to 23680. And, of course, I have Mr. Tom Benson joining me as well. So what we're going to have to do is when we see a hashtag something on a controversial subject, read it with a grain of salt because you don't know who's really saying it. Well, we should do that anyway.
Yeah,
we're still as a society trying to figure out social media. Yeah, I think because it's still a relatively new phenomenon for the world, and we're still trying to understand how to deal with this new technology. But what's really interesting about this to me is they were going after both sides. I've noticed something here. The Democrats and the left are really been pushing the Russia thing hard. Why have they been pushing it hard? Because they're trying to push this narrative that Trump was somehow involved with Russia. They've politicized this thing. So what happens then? So then you have a lot of people on the right, like Tucker Carlson, who I like a lot, but he's been kind of saying Russia is not a big deal. We're making too much out of it. It's not as big of a deal. We shouldn't be as worried about it. And it's just an attempt by the left to attack Donald Trump. So you have this division here because we've made everything partisan. We politicized everything. And so you now have it where they've all tried to make this about Trump. And this was never about Trump. Russia is trying to get involved in this stuff because we've done that to other countries, and Russia's been doing this forever. They're just ramping it up again. But Russia is trying to get involved using all this stuff to divide us because they see an opportunity. They see an opportunity because of the division that already exists in this country and the balkanization and everything. They want to push that even more because it will weaken us and, of course, make them stronger because they're not our friends. So that's the issue here. So instead of everyone making this a partisan political issue, that's what everyone's doing. Maybe we should say, hey, this isn't about Trump. This isn't about Hillary. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about Russia trying to divide us. Although, like I said, we're doing a pretty good job on our own. But, this really got me thinking. And it reminds me, every time this happens, it reminds me of something that I read years ago. I think it was in 2009 that this came out. And it became a big deal in 2009 because of the economic recession that hit. There is a Russian professor who is ex-KGB, by the way, which tells me that not only does he think this is happening, but
the KGB it to happen.
Well, the KGB was probably trying to make this happen. The Russian government was probably trying to make this happen. And I guarantee you they still are. His name is Igor Panarin. He was making the rounds in the time, but he made a prediction actually in 1998 that the United States would break up into 6 pieces. Now, he thought it would happen in 2010. Obviously, he was wrong. That did not happen. But according to him, if you look at the map, it would break up into 6 pieces. So you would have from California to like Utah, that part would break up and become the California Republic. Then you have the Central North American Republic. So that goes from like Montana down to like Missouri all the way to Ohio. Then you would have the Texas Republic, which goes from New Mexico to Florida. And then you have the Atlantic America, which he says may join the European Union. That's a little much. But which goes to Tennessee to Maine. Now, I think a lot of this is, I don't agree with a lot of it, even if we did break up how it would work. But he said this. He was a leading political analyst. He said the dollar is not secured by anything. The country's foreign debt has grown more like an avalanche. And even though in the early 1980s there was no debt, by 1998, when I first made my prediction, it exceeded $2 trillion. Now it's more than $11 trillion. He said that in 2000, so now it's 20 trillion. This is a pyramid that can only collapse. He thought the economic collapse would sort of speed it up. He says it is already collapsing due to the financial crisis. 3 of the largest and oldest 5 banks on Wall Street have already ceased to exist, and 2 are barely surviving. Their losses are the biggest in history. Now what we will see is a change in the regulatory system on a global financial scale. America will no longer be the world's financial regulator. And yada, yada, yada. So he focused more on economic reasons and income inequality and all that. And when I first read this years ago when this came out, I remember it, I thought, this is crazy. This could never happen. No way. We are America, united under the Constitution, focused on the individual. We have our differences, but that's the beauty of America, is we can all come together at the end.
Diversity makes us stronger.
Exactly. Yeah. The more I think about this, though, unfortunately, the more I think it's possible. Because where he was wrong, though, is what's dividing us. He thought it would all be economic. And it's not. And this is one of the things that, in our Civil War, everyone says most of that was economic. A lot of it was economic, but most of it was cultural. The South and the North had very different cultures, very different ideas of what the culture should be. That was a big part of it as well. I mean, most of it was about slavery, which affected both the culture and economics. But it was cultural. If anything were to divide us now and to have us break up, it would be this cultural balkanization that I'm seeing in this country right now. I see the incredible divide in this country. And a lot of times, not always, because you have swing states, but a lot of times, it depends on the state you're in and on the city you live in. So it's weird to me that California and New York, for instance, are guaranteed Democrat states in every presidential election. Why is that? You automatically go into New York City and you're all of a sudden a leftist Democrat.
Sure.
For the most part.
And there's 10 million people there.
Yeah, and then you go to Texas, and then all of a sudden that's very conservative. And then I think of all these divisions and how these divisions between the New York liberals and the Texas conservatives just seems to grow and grow and grow. And then I'm like, oh man, maybe this is possible. And I think Russia believes it's possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why Russia keeps trying to get involved, because I think this is actually something Russia is trying to do. And there's a part of me, and a lot of people will think I'm crazy for bringing this up, and maybe I am, but there's a part of me that actually thinks, with all of the division we have seen in this country in the past couple of years over this stuff, and a lot of times it's regional. A lot of times the culture depends on the state and the region you live in. It's just the way it is. Maybe we should be concerned about this. Maybe we need to step back and say, hey, maybe we need to try and understand each other a little better. Maybe we shouldn't be quite as divided as we are. Maybe we should unite under the Constitution. I don't know, it's amazing stuff. And then you have this idea, okay, that we should there's a movement now that we should get rid of the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you get rid of the Electoral College? You have it would be popular vote is what they would say. Hillary won the popular vote. Why did she win the popular vote? Mostly because of L.A. and New York City and some of these other big cities.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have these big liberal cities with mass populations basically having a lot more control over who becomes president of the United States. Now, some people say, that's great. That's the way it should be. Popular vote, democracy, all that stuff. If you do that, though, in a lot of these less populated states, they are going to feel disenfranchised. They're going to feel like they don't have the representation that aligns with their values of their state, and that's going to grow even more. So you add this whole idea that we should have the popular vote, and then you have a lot of these other lower populated states or conservative states or these, the Midwest or wherever, they start to feel disenfranchised. All that does is increase the balkanization. That's why the Electoral College was important, because the people in those states, even though they had less population, still wanted to have some say in what was going on in the national government. You take away the Electoral College, you take away their say. So I look at this, I look at what Russia's doing, I look at what a Russian former KGB agent predicted, I look at the mass divisions of this country, and I look at how it all breaks up in the electoral map, and then trying to get rid of the Electoral College. And unfortunately, if we don't wake up, and if we don't turn around and change, unfortunately, I think this is a lot more possible than it used to be. And it might sound crazy, but how much has happened in the past couple of years that you thought was never possible, you thought was completely crazy, and now are happening? You just look at Antifa. How many people support the idea of violence in the streets? Or the idea of people disrespecting the flag? Or the idea of people tearing down statues in the streets, and not only calling for the tear down of Confederate statues, but our founding statues. When you look at all of that stuff is incredibly divisive. And it could lead to our balkanization. And Russia is out there, and they are going to stoke this as much as we can if we don't wake up.
One of the things that the people who want to get rid of the Electoral College should realize is that our country is not a direct democracy.
It never has been.
We're a representative republic.
That was the point. And I've had people kind of argue, well, the only reason we have the Electoral College was because of slavery, and the southern states wanted to protect slavery. They wanted more representation to protect slavery. That was the only reason. That was one of the reasons. It was not the only reason. There were many reasons. It was a hotly debated thing because even the northern states, who weren't really that big on slavery, still wanted to protect the rights of their states. So the idea was just about slavery isn't true either. But people, individuals, they have their values that align with their states. So you go in these less populated states in the Midwest, and all of a sudden you get rid of as much say as they had, and they're going to feel incredibly disenfranchised. They're going to feel like the values of their states are not reflected in the national government. That is why it was broken up the way it was, among other reasons as well. It was also supposed to be a last stopgap for a dictator, so if the people ever elected a dictator, the electors could go against it or whatever. Obviously, that could never happen now. But I find all this fascinating, how Russia's trying to get involved, and it just happened to be a former Russian KGB agent years ago talking about how he thought the United States was going to break up. And I guarantee you Russia looks at that. I guarantee you Russia has plans, and Russia's trying to do that. And as much as I want to believe it's impossible, I don't believe it anymore, unfortunately, with the way things are. It's unlikely, but how many things have happened in the past couple of years you thought would never happen? 407-916-5400. Text to 23680 with your comments as well. I got some text coming in. It looks like this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
You want to listen to Beyond Reason Radio live on your smartphone? Download the Beyond Reason Radio app now. Available in the Google Play or Apple App Stores. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
So we got our buddy Joe in Titusville who's decided to give us a call. He never misses a show. I know it. I knew it. Never misses a show. Joe in Titusville, what is up, my friend? How are you?
I'm doing good. Glad to talk to you. I finally got through to your show. But, no, I think there's two fundamental problems that we really, as people, need to tackle in our government.
All right, shoot, Joe.
One is the death grip that the political parties have on the government, both Republican and Democrat. They've both proved repeatedly that they cannot govern this country successfully as far as the will of the people.
Okay.
Because both of them have acted against the will of the people on numerous occasions, against almost everything.
Okay, there's a lot of people that believe that. That's why the number of independents are growing.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm an independent. I changed in 92. But the other problem is what we deem as media okay, and news is not news. It's opinion shows. It's a whole lot of things. It's not news, okay? And people have to understand that when they listen to Rachel or Hannity or any of these people, they're not news shows. Contrary to popular belief, they're opinion shows. They give you their opinion.
Okay. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, but it's not obvious, because I run into people, and I drive all over the state, and I run into people saying, "Oh, did you hear this?" That's their opinion. That's not fact. You know what I mean? And people believe it. If I was in the military, okay, and one of the things about brainwashing, okay, one of the fundamental steps of brainwashing is if you say something enough times, there's a percentage of people who will start to believe it. Okay.
I mean, this has existed since the beginning of our country, though.
I realize it, but it was never so bad, because now we have this media, and we have Twitter, and we have Facebook, and, it's being put out there so many times. Somebody reads a story on Facebook, and oh, did you hear this guy did this? It's not true, but they pass it off as true. And then on the
So what's the solution, Joe?
Well, I think our public needs to really get better educated, and I mean in common sense.
I agree with that, but how do you do that?
Basically, we need people to start standing up like yourself and pointing out, irregardless of party, irregardless of personal belief, what this person is saying is lying. It's like when our president goes out and says, this tax bill has no effect on me. Yes, it does. Yet, and people accept it and automatically, give them a buy on it. We shouldn't give our politicians a buy on lying, and we really need to start considering voting for independents more than our political parties, because, I mean, everybody knows the political parties aren't on our side, yet we continue to vote down party lines. Oh, he's a Democrat. I'm a Democrat. Got to vote for him. He's right. I mean, we the people need to grow up and start doing our job, and our job is to vote.
Okay, Joe, I appreciate your call. Makes some decent points. I mean, he talks about what I've been talking about for a while is groupthink. We are in what is called the we society. Been talking about it forever. Read the book Pendulum, where we are more interested in our connection with our group, our tribe, or whatever that is, more than than what's right, the truth, our individuality, our individual thoughts. And that's just where society is. And it's going to be extremely difficult to get past that. And I don't necessarily know what the solution is other than, listening to this show, of course, right?
Of course.
Right?
Absolutely. That's why we're here. But I was talking to somebody yesterday who told me that he has two sons, 18 and 20 years old, who do not watch any traditional newscast. No Fox, no CNN, no network news. Don't read newspapers, don't read magazines. What they do is they have a circle of friends that they check with online. And these people repeat things that they hear report as fact, but they're not really fact. But everybody believes it because everybody within their little circle of friends or tribe, as you may call them, say it, so they believe it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem. Now, it's not necessarily a new problem. If you read the history of the world, it's happened before. But it's definitely a problem. Like I said, we're still trying to figure out the social media thing, I think, as a society. So speaking of tribalism, in the next segment, I want to play my voice of reason of the day, which is actually Tucker. He talked a little bit about that in a monologue he did this week that I thought was very good. So we'll get to that and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
You know what's beyond reason? Yaffee is now on YouTube. Go to YouTube now and just search Beyond Reason Radio. Your safe space for conservative thought. not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
Yes, welcome to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio, Orlando Smart Talk Radio. We are on until 10 p.m. tonight. But if you missed any of the show, no worries. I will post the podcast later. Just go to beyondreasonradio.com. Catch it there or anywhere else that podcasts are available. So the Packers and Aaron Rodgers made a request that all the players and then all the fans lock arms to show unity in the National Football League.
That was before tonight's game. So how did it work out?
Not that good, actually. According to Michelle Steele of ESPN, she tweeted out, vast majority did not link arms, but many sang along with the anthem. Right behind Green Bay bench, a sign, shame on the NFL, vets stand for the flag. So Rodgers, trying to play both sides of it, I guess, says this is about equality. This is about unity and love and growing together as a society and starting a conversation around something that may be a little bit uncomfortable for people. Okay.
Well, maybe about unity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the people want to join the players in their goal and unite with them, you know?
What they should have done is ignored it and just played the game. Why? This is not why you watch sports. This is not why you watch the NFL.
That's right.
I don't watch the NFL because I want to have a conversation about where society is going.
Mm-hmm.
I want to watch the NFL because I want to watch a game and be entertained. I mean, this is just, it's like if I want to be informed, I go to a bookstore. I don't go to Chuck E. Cheese. You go to Chuck E. Cheese to be entertained. You go to a bookstore to be informed. You watch the NFL to be entertained. You watch the news to be informed. Although a lot of news has become entertainment, as Joe was pointing out. But it's just, they should have just ignored Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of doing this. This just turns people off even more. So I wanted to get to my voice of reason of the day, speaking on the race issue, from none other than Tucker Carlson. I actually don't always agree with Tucker. He's a little bit, I don't know, he's become too much of a populist for my taste in a lot of ways. But he was called a racist by a Mediaite columnist. So he responded on his show, and I thought his response was really good and a voice of reason. So let's play it. Here's my voice of reason of the day.
It wasn't that long ago that calling someone a racist was a big deal. It was a devastating attack on a person's character, if not blood libel. Now, everywhere you look, people just barely to the right of Al Gore are being denounced as white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Confederates. It happened to us last week. On a website called Mediaite, blogger Justin Baragona wrote a piece entitled, "Tucker Carlson Isn't Even Trying to Hide His White Nationalist Leanings Anymore." His evidence for this? Well, it was a segment we did pointing out that the Democratic Party has basically given up trying to appeal to the American middle class and has started openly encouraging illegal. We didn't mention race at all because it's irrelevant. Stagnant blue-collar wages hurt black Americans in St. Louis every bit as much as they hurt white Americans in Des Moines. So how exactly does that qualify as white nationalism? Well, Justin Baragona didn't explain, nor did he accept our invitation to come on this show and lay out his reasoning, because like an awful lot of name callers, he's a coward. Too bad. It would have been interesting to hear someone tell us exactly what a white nationalist is and how we qualify. Baragona is not the first person to make that charge, by the way. It's absurd and untrue, not to mention conveniently imprecise, so typically we just shrug it off on the theory that it's pointless to argue with demagogues. But there's enough of that kind of libel flying around the country right now that we thought it might be worth taking a second to lay out clearly what this show believes on the question of race. Above all, we believe that skin color is not the most important thing about a person. What matters most is how you live, the choices you make, what you love, what you hate, how you treat others. Now that puts us at odds with the modern left, which classifies people first and foremost by their race. We think that's unfair. Your race is one thing you cannot control. You were born with it. That's why it's wrong to judge people on the basis of it. In fact, that used to be the very definition of racism before liberals changed the rules to exempt exempt themselves from it. Now, this show is based in Washington, D.C., the most democratic city in America, so we know and like a lot of people who call themselves liberal. Many of them are decent human beings, and they're motivated by noble impulses. Some of them sincerely believe that tribalism empowers people. They're wrong. Tribalism diminishes people. It makes their unique qualities irrelevant. It lumps them into a pile with a lot of other people who just happen to look alike. It's dehumanizing. It erases the individual. Unfortunately, it's also politically hard to resist. Groupthink and race hatred are remarkably efficient organizing tools, as both parties have proved over the years. And so tribalism flourishes in this country. In the workplace, in the academy, in the media, the left has created systems where people are judged, punished, and rewarded solely based on their immutable characteristics. This is bigotry, the very definition of it. Yet, in an Orwellian sleight of hand for which they become justly famous, the left now claims that all who complain about this are themselves bigots. The most remarkable part is how quickly progressives have forgotten the lessons of the worst things this country ever did, slavery and segregation. Not everyone who looks alike is alike. Collective punishment is immoral. If you find yourself generalizing about entire groups, stop. It never ends well. And more than anything, people are more important than tribes. Every one of them is an individual created by God. Treat them that way.
I loved so much of what he said there. And it's just kind of, I mean, he got kind of deep there, but it's exactly what I have been talking about on this show for so long. The idea of groupthink, the idea of tribalism. He points out in his little monologue there that it's good for politics, and it is. We are being divided and grouped together in these different groups for political reasons a lot of times, because if you do that, divide and conquer strategy, but you can get groups on your side. But it's interesting now how the people who say they're against things like bigotry and racism are practicing the kind of tribalism in other ways, grouping people in those kind of situations and then labeling them based on that. You know, they get mad when certain people group all blacks together, but then they'll group all cops together. Or they'll group all of the rich together. Or they'll group, in different ways. And it's happening all the time. Instead of thinking as an individual, we are thrown into these groups. But we allow it to happen because we are in a time where we are identifying more based on our group we're associated with rather than our individuality. So it's something I've been talking about, but he put it pretty well, I thought. So good stuff from the voice of reason of the day. So I actually want to shift gears a little bit since we have a little bit of time. When Trump was talking at the UN, and he was heavily critical of our enemies, especially North Korea, a lot of people were upset at him. A lot of people said he was escalating it too far, acting kind of like it was in a vacuum, like North Korea wasn't doing much, and then Trump's just making everything worse because he's talking tough against our enemies. When actually his talking tough has actually helped.
It was a dark speech.
Oh, yes, I know. They kept saying it was so dark. Because I don't know, what do they want us to have? Sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops when talking about North Korea and our enemies at the UN?
Leslie Gore had that song out back in 1967.
Thanks, Mr. Music Trivia over there. But I mean, come on. So, and I was thinking, and I was one of these people who was not upset at Trump. I'm not going to be upset at our commander-in-chief talking tough against our enemies. And it's actually worked a little bit. China's finally starting to get on board with us a little bit. The UN is finally really toughening sanctions against them. North Korea backed down on doing anything with Guam. So there's a possibility this could work. But I wanted to play something for you that kind of another example of why I'm not upset that Trump would talk tough against North Korea. Just listen to Otto Warmbier's parents. He, obviously, as you know, was that college student who stole a sign, then was condemned to hard labor. He was convicted to what was it, 10 years of hard labor or something like that?
For stealing a poster.
For stealing a poster. He was an American in their country, and that's what they did. And then all of a sudden, then nobody knows what happened to him. And then they just dump him off here, and he dies a little bit later. They dump him off here in a coma, and he dies a little bit later.
But obviously, it was more involved than just a coma. Because normally, when you think of a coma, you think of somebody who's in a vegetated, asleep state.
Right. Listen to his parents here. They were on CNN, and they were talking about this. And after you listen to this, tell me that you're still upset that Trump talks tough against the people that did this to an American citizen. Go ahead and play it for me.
We climb the stairs to meet with Otto. Halfway up the stairs, we hear this loud, guttural, howling, inhuman sound. We don't know what it is. We continue up the steps. We get to the top of the steps, and we look across in the airplane, and Otto is laying on a stretcher. He's strapped to the stretcher, and he's moving around and jerking violently, making these howling, inhuman sounds. Greta and Cindy go down the steps. It's too much for them to handle. Austin and I walk over to Otto, and he's in this condition. He has a shaved head. His eyes are darting around they're as big as saucers. He's blind. He's deaf. He's got a feeding tube. And we kneel down and we hug him and try to connect with him. And he's a complete vegetable. And his bottom teeth look like they had taken a pair of pliers and rearranged them. And so there was no comforting Otto. This was horrible. And this noise he kept doing this.
We weren't prepared for this at all. No one. How could you be? No one. How could you be? Had any idea going in there what we were going to see. His hands and legs were
totally deformed. 2 days after Otto came home, his fever spiked to over 104 degrees. Otto had this huge scar on his right foot. He was on his deathbed when he came home to us. This was not a pleasant sight. This was a horrible sight. That's why they released him. They didn't want him to die on their soil.
I mean, when you hear that, I can't even imagine. I don't even know how the parents were able to keep a straight, not break down in tears or whatever while they were saying that.
Terrible.
It's awful. And that's what they did to us. Imagine what they do to their own people. I've seen interviews with people that escaped North Korea. It's not pretty what they do over there to their own people. But that's what they did to an American citizen. And they've done stuff like this to Japanese citizens and South Korean citizens. And when you hear that and how awful that is, and these people, the coroner says there was no evidence of torture. They obviously did something to him. Because this was a perfectly healthy young man from, you could tell that all of a sudden it isn't heard from and then is dumped off to us in a coma. Common sense tells you that they did something to him. And when you hear that, and when you see that, and that I'm supposed to be upset that Trump talks tough against them, I'm supposed to be upset that our commander-in-chief finally is willing to stand up to them and call them out and tell them they're evil and tell them they need to stop and tell them if they don't stop or if they ever threaten us, we'll destroy them. I'm supposed to be upset at that? No, I'm not upset at that. That is one thing the president should do as commander-in-chief, is talk tough against our enemies, especially brutal, evil enemies like that. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. Yeah, I thought I would just share that with you. It's a heartbreaking stuff. I can't even imagine what the parents are going through, you know?
And still,
exactly.
I'm sure they're haunted.
I mean, when he was talking about the noises that they heard his son making, can you just comprehend having to go through that? First, you have no idea what's happening to your son as he's over there. But then it's just, I mean, they should have never let him go over there in the first place, but jeez. All right, this is Beyond Reason Radio. We'll end on a lighter note, of course, with things that made Yaffee laughy. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you like Beyond Reason Radio, well, make sure to show it by liking the Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
Yes, this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. So Tom Benson, did you see that the show Will and Grace is back on?
I saw it was back on, but I'm not that familiar with it. I've never watched the show when it was originally on, so I'm not hip.
Yeah, I never really did either. I saw some episodes, and I guess it was kind of funny. I'm terrified to watch the new season because I mean, the actors, I know they're really leftist, and I just know it's gonna be like I just hope.
You know where it's going.
I just hope it's not going to be a bash conservatives, bash Trump fest. I mean, they do it every once in a while, whatever, but I just hope it's not going to be a big thing in that show. But I also think it's very interesting that it's another 90s show that they're bringing back. 90s nostalgia is in.
Oh, the good old days, yes.
For me, it is, okay? The 90s was the best. They need to bring back, because you have Fuller House, you have Rocko's Modern Life coming back, you have the Gilmore Girls. Was that 90s or 2000s?
I don't remember. I never watched that one either.
What else? There's a bunch of other things. They need to bring back Family Matters. You need to have Family Still Matters. I mean, they did a Boy Meets World thing. So I just think they need to bring back Family Matters. I need some Steve Urkel in my life. I'm just saying, but I don't know. I'm terrified to watch this show just because I'm afraid it's going to be more politics. All right, it is that time of the show once again. Yes, it is time for things that made Yaffee laughy. And on a lighter note here. So this is one of the things that made me laugh and it made me say, yes, good job. Senator Ben Sasse, who I'm a big fan of, he tweeted this out. You'll see where I'm going with this in a little bit. He said this: "No one loves American versus American fighting more than Putin. His intel agency stoke both sides of every divide." And that's exactly what I talked about earlier in the show. Richard Spencer, we all know him, the racist, white supremacist guy, white nationalist guy. He says, "In the minds of goober conservatives, the Russians are to blame for racial divisions." Going back against Ben Sasse. This is what Ben Sasse responded. He said, "Oh, let goobers and non-goobers agree on this. Racists like you are to blame. But Putin's agencies also love using you as their divisive tool." He says, "Don't get me wrong. We'll always have brown shirt pajama boy Nazis like you and your lonely pals stoking division. But here's America 101. You don't get America, you said. You do not have some human right, some abstract thing given you by God or something like that. Actually, that's exactly what America declares we do have. People are the image bearers of God, created with dignity and inalienable rights. Sadly, you don't understand human dignity. A person's skin, ancestry, and bank balance have nothing to do with their intrinsic value. The Declaration of Universal Dignity is what America is about. Madison called our Constitution the greatest reflection on human nature. You talk about culture but don't know squat about Western heritage. which sees people not as tribes but as individuals of limitless worth. The celebration of universal dignity is our culture, and it rejects your white culture crybaby politics. It rejects all identity politics. Sometime after moving back into your parents' basement, you knockoff Nazis fell in love with reheated 20th century will to power garbage. Says your ideas aren't just hateful and un-American poison, they're also just so dang boring. And the future doesn't belong to your stupid memes. He says, great. He says, get a real job, clown. Find an actual neighbor to serve. You'll be happier. Have a nice day. Get a real job, clown. Get out of your pajama boy Nazi outfits. That was great stuff. I love Ben Says. He's awesome. What a response. All right, I appreciate y'all listening to the show tonight. If you miss any of the show, make sure to catch out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. And, of course, share with your friends. Send me a friend request on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter @BeyondReasonR. And, well, have a good weekend. I'll catch you guys next time.